Hello and welcome to Friday night, our speaker series here at Wey Valley Academy. And welcome to our audience watching online. It's great to have you with us. The guest speakers who join us in our Friday live sessions are invited to share their experience in the fields in which they work. We hope they'll help you to learn more about the opportunities that exist in the world beyond, and perhaps inspire you as you think about the paths you might follow in your future lives. Today's speaker is Mark Tattersall. Mark is the Artistic Director of Dorchester Arts, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome him to the stage. Mark.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody here. Thank you to everybody who's watching online. I am indeed Mark Tattersall, and I'm currently the Artistic Director at Dorchester Arts, just over the hill there. But I haven't always been there. I haven't always been from this part of the world. But one thing I have always done is been engaged with the arts. That's been my whole career. That's all I've ever done, is work in the arts. And as you'll see in the course of what I'm going to tell you today, it's often a bit of a roller coaster ride in many, many ways. Different things, different opportunities, good points, bad points. But it's been incredibly exciting. And I hope that today, even if one of you takes away something from this talk that makes you inspired to pursue a career in the arts, I'll be very happy about that. So what's my background? Where do I come from? Well, I actually don't come from a family that was particularly engaged in the arts. My dad was a doctor, my mum was a librarian. But I was lucky, I suppose, that I grew up in a household where the arts were kind of around. It was something that my mum and dad used to take me to see. I used to go to concerts and art galleries and things when I was young, and I was very lucky. Probably the first thing I remember going to was this concert up in Newcastle in the northeast of England. Now, you won't have heard of this guy, Manitas de Plata. He was an amazing Spanish guitarist. He was actually living in France at the time, but his roots were in France. And I remember going to see this when I was 7 years old and being completely in awe. The hall was full. Everybody was in huge anticipation. This was a global star who was coming to play in my town. And that was a pretty special moment. And that stayed with me. But little did I know that about 40 years later, I would be working with his sons and his nephews in a band called the Gypsy Kings. Now, I had no idea at the time, but that concert really stayed with me. I went to meet him afterwards, backstage, shook their hands, got their autographs. And I thought, what an amazing life this must be, going around, playing in different halls and having people clap and this, that, and the other. But at the same time, I was a nervous little kid. I was a school refuser when I was 7 years old, 8 years old. Wouldn't get out of the car. My mum would take me to the school and I would just sit there and I would refuse to get out. I don't remember really what it was that made me so afraid to go into the school or so lacking in motivation to go into the school. But what I knew is I really didn't want to go into that place. And then somebody had a very bright idea. They had the idea of putting me in a school play. So I was a nervous kid, wouldn't really talk to people, wouldn't put myself forward. Now, if you talk to people today, they'd be pretty amazed by that, because actually the difficulty usually with me is shutting me up. But at that time, that wasn't the truth. So they just thought, well, maybe if he gets on stage, maybe that'll help with becoming a more outward sort of personality. So what did I become? I became a weasel. I was a weasel in Toad of Toad Hall, and it was the first time I ever stood on a stage. And it was a pretty magical moment for me. What my mum always said, actually, was that before I was a weasel, she couldn't get me to school. Once I'd been a weasel, she couldn't get me away from school. I absolutely loved it. Every moment of that was great. It was just that sense that somehow I was able, by being someone else, by being in a sort of pretending to be someone else, by acting, I was somehow managing to be myself. It's an odd thing, but some of you who perform might understand that. By getting up on a stage, you gain a confidence, which isn't just a confidence when you're up on that stage, but a confidence in your daily life, a confidence in many ways. And I've got to pay a huge debt of gratitude to that person who suggested me getting into the school play. Because honestly, if they hadn't done it, I probably wouldn't be standing here now, having done the amazing things that I had the opportunity to do in the rest of my life. So there I am, age 12, covered in gravy browning, actually, being Atahualpa in a play called The Royal Hunt of the Sun. And it was fantastic. It was just such a great experience. And it sort of set the tone for the rest of my life. So the first light bulb moment, and I'm going to give you a few of these light bulb moments, things that have really dawned on me as I've gone through my life and been involved in the arts, is the arts can genuinely change people's lives. And I totally believe that. And down at Dorchester Arts, we still see it now. We see young people like yourselves in youth theatre having that same experience as me, of coming on board and becoming more confident in themselves, actually learning lots and lots of life skills through being involved in the arts. And then people who are ill late in life, who come to things like our Parkinson's dance class. I don't know if some of your grandparents maybe suffer from an illness called Parkinson's disease. We have dance classes for people with Parkinson's disease who can come along and keep moving in a way that really, really helps them. The arts genuinely change people's lives. And that's why I'm so excited about having been involved in it all my life. So what happened next? After I'd been on stage, I decided I was playing the piano very, very badly. So I decided I wanted to do something else musical, and I bought a drum kit. My mum and dad bought me a drum kit. So age 12, I took up the drums. But never for a second did I think I was going to be a drummer. Such a thing just wasn't really in my head. I went to a school which was quite academic, where you're expected to just do lots of book learning, a little bit of performing arts, but nobody ever really suggested that I could be in the arts or be a musician for the rest of my life. So I used to play in little bands around the place and just sort of mess around on it. But then I went to university, and I went to Sheffield University, and I was just very lucky. And that's something which is going to come up later too, a little bit of luck. I was very lucky that I went to Sheffield at a time when the music industry in Sheffield, the music scene in Sheffield, was incredibly exciting. Now, none of the names I mentioned in the Sheffield music scene in the late 1970s are going to mean a whole lot to you. But to me, it was amazing suddenly to be in the same town where bands like the Human League were beginning to become famous. And so I got excited about that, and we all started forming bands. And somebody said to me, "You've got a drum kit, haven't you?" And I went, "Yeah, I've got a drum kit." "You've also got a car." Now that was important. You find yourself very popular once you get a driving license, actually, if you're in the arts, because you always need to travel around in the arts. And if you've got a car, you'll often get a job. So I had a car and a drum kit, and I got myself into a band. And still, I didn't really think that I was going to be doing this for the rest of my life, being involved in the arts, because I was studying something totally different. I was studying Japanese studies and geography, would you believe? Why would that make you think that I was going to spend the rest of my career in the arts? Well, the honest truth is that university is about more than actually just the subjects you're learning. It's that first step in becoming independent and finding out about life in a bigger sort of way. And for me, what was just as important as studying really was the experiences I was having outside that as a drummer. And we did all right, actually. Our little band was doing okay. I was doing some gigs, and actually there was one before that. So that's me aged about, I don't know, 20, I suppose, playing in a bar in Sheffield in the university. That's me at the back. And we started getting gigs, and we started getting solo gigs, and people started paying us a bit of attention. And then I got into a band. This keeps going forward too. So I got into a band called Chak, who no one again will ever have heard of. Even the older people in this room will never have heard of this band. But we were actually quite popular, and we were about to get signed by a record company in about 1982. And I suddenly thought to myself, do I really want to go off and sell oil for the Japanese? Or would it be more exciting to be in a rock band? Fairly obvious answer to this question. It'd be much more exciting to be in a rock band. Really pleased my mum and dad. But God bless them, they actually said, if that's what you want to do, that's what you should go and do. And again, I'm incredibly grateful to my mum and dad for having the faith in me that when I said, I don't think I'm going to go off and get that great job selling oil for the Japanese, what I'm going to do is play in my rock band, they actually went, okay, we believe in you. And that's very important, is to try and get the ammunition to say to the people around you, I really mean this. I really understand what I'm trying to do here. And I'm really passionate about it. I'm serious about it. And they got that impression with me and made it easy for me to do. So here we are. And this is a photo session that we had for what was at the time the biggest rock magazine in the UK, the NME. And there we were, suddenly on the pages of one of the rock magazines as my little band Chak. And that's me on the left. Mark on the right, who ended up in a band called Moloko, who again, some of the older people in the audience might remember. And we were doing okay. And so life was looking pretty good. What could possibly go wrong? Next light bulb moment is that the arts can be unpredictable. I got chucked out of the band. So having made the decision that I wasn't going to go and take that fantastic job selling oil for the Japanese, I got myself into a band and then promptly got sacked. It's a long story. I believe I didn't do anything wrong. But at the end of the day, it wasn't the right time for me to be in that band, and I had to move along. So there I was, drowning my sorrows in a hostelry in Sheffield, and I ran into some people I knew from another band. And lo and behold, they said to me, "What, you've just left Jack, have you?" And I said, "Yeah." And they said, "Well, we're just about to record a new album and go on tour." And I went, "Yeah?" And they said, "We need a drummer. Do you fancy it?" Well, it took me about 3 seconds to think about that, I guess. And the answer to that was yes. Now, this is a band who, again, you won't have heard of, but who at the time had already recorded, by the time I was with them, about 10 albums and were really quite successful, the band called Cabaret Voltaire. And I was just very lucky that I was talking to them that evening in the pub, and they were just looking for someone like me to play the drums with them. And that's what I did for the next 4 years of my life, from 82 to 86. I played in this band. So through some strokes of luck, I sort of found myself just in a better place than I thought I was going to be. And the light bulb moment then was, you need a little bit of luck in the arts as well. And the reason I say that is because it's not a straight career path. If you really think you want to be in something where you can predict where you're going to be in 5 years' time, I'm not sure the arts is quite for you. And why? Well, it's because the arts of itself is actually quite an unpredictable world. Fashions change, tastes change, audiences change, a lot changes, and you have to be prepared to go on that roller coaster ride. The other thing is, it's not like being a solicitor maybe or a banker or something where there's quite a predictable career path in a big organization. Usually in the arts, you're having to think on your feet a little bit and be a little bit flexible. It's just that kind of world. I happen to love that. Lots of the people I work with love it. But I think it's really important that when you're thinking about what you want to do as a future career, you have a think about whether that kind of life's for you. Actually, whether you enjoy those ups and downs, those surprises around the next corner, it's great, but it might not be for you. So we'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later on. But having worked with some amazing artists, I've also learned that it's not always about luck. And there was a very famous golfer called Arnold Palmer who once said, in an interview, someone said to him, "Well, Arnold, you seem to be having a lot of luck at the moment. All those putts are going in." And he said, "Yeah, you know what? It's funny. The more I practice, the luckier I seem to get." And the honest truth is that actually a lot of it does come down to sheer hard work. And if you put in that hard work, you'll find that you're luckier. Now, obviously, you sometimes just need to be in the same place, in the right place at the right time. But you will find that if you really stick at it, and you really, really practice and you really, really hone your skills, when that moment of luck comes along, you'll be ready for it. And the other thing is that sometimes you really do have to stick at it, because sometimes it's just not your time. In the music industry, I worked with so many artists, as you'll find out later on, who were supremely talented, but who never made it. And it was so frustrating because you knew they were fantastic. You knew they were incredibly talented. But for some reason, it just wasn't quite their time. But then there were other artists I worked with who'd been working and working and working for years, doing that same thing, just slogging away. And they must have been thinking, when's it going to be my time? And then sometimes the world just turns, everything clicks into place, and people go, it's your moment. And those are some of the ones I respect most because they've stuck at it, they've kept going. 2 examples of that, one from my era and one from very recently. So there was a band called Pulp in Sheffield that I used to play gigs with when I was young. And everybody thought, when they had a massive hit record in the 90s, everybody thought, wow, this fantastic new band that nobody had heard of before. I was playing in a pub with them 10 years ago. And you go, why don't you know that? Well, the honest truth is, Pulp had just kept at it, and all of a sudden, that was what the world was looking for, and their moment arrived. And thinking much more recently, I was listening to the radio this morning about Chapel Roan. Do we know about Chapel Roan? Name ring a bell? In 2014, so that's what, 11 years ago, Chapel Roan was signed to Atlantic Records in America. So she's been signed to Atlantic Records since 2014, and no one had ever heard of her. And then years go around, and 2020, she was dropped by Atlantic Records. So being dropped by a record company means you no longer have a contract with them. They put records out, they tried, and nothing happened. And then you're let go. And very often, that's the point at which musicians go, I've given up. I'm not going to do this anymore. Chapel Roan didn't. She went on. She was absolutely confident in what she was doing. And now, just been made BBC's sort of Breakthrough Artist of the Year, and suddenly a global star. And I really respect that for sticking at it. So you could say, oh, she got lucky. Someone was just looking for what she had, that thing that she has. But that was more than 10 years of incredibly hard work and real faith in yourself. So sometimes that's what it's about. Yes, you need a little bit of luck, but you also need to stick at it. And in the arts, that's a really important lesson to learn. So meanwhile, what happened to me? I ended up here. I ended up at a football stadium in Marbella. So having been kicking around in Sheffield, doing little gigs in pubs and bars and things, my first ever concert outside South Yorkshire was in the municipal football stadium in Marbella with a band called New Order. So that was in front of 5,000 people. Bit of a shock, bit of an eye-opener, especially when I dropped a stick halfway through one of the songs. But, you learn to cope, and that's actually a good learning curve. And so it was immensely exciting. I was suddenly thinking, wow, I'm glad I had that drink in the pub after I got kicked out of that other band. Maybe this wasn't such a bad thing after all. And off we went, touring around the world. I recorded a couple of albums with them, some EPs. I did radio sessions on Radio 1, a guy called John Peel and Janice Long, and almost appeared on telly. Didn't appear on telly, actually, because I lost part of my thumb in an accident. And I was standing there at the back of the TV studio with my arm in a sling thinking, that should have been me on the TV, but it wasn't this time round. And it was a great thing to do. It was an amazing experience, absolutely incredible experience to be in that band, and really, really exciting. But the honest answer was that these things don't always last forever. And yet again, here comes another bump in the road. Just as I was thinking that I was set for life with this band, they said, we're actually going to take a break. We're going to take a break from recording. We're going to take a break from touring. And actually, we can't promise you any work in the next couple of years. And so I started doing auditions. And I started doing auditions for quite well-known bands, a band called ABC, a band called Everything But the Girl, and thinking that one day I would get one of these gigs. And I didn't. I just wasn't getting the jobs. And it began to dawn on me that maybe I just wasn't good enough to go on playing the drums for the rest of my life. Maybe that wasn't the thing for me. So I started looking around for what else I could do, because I knew that some people who started out as performers actually ended up doing other things in the arts in their lives. And that's actually one of the good things about, hang on, we got a battery. You want me to, are you okay? I'll carry on. One of the good things about the arts, and this is really important, and if you take away anything from this talk, maybe this is it. We got some tech things going on. One thing to take away from this talk is that the other thing about the arts not being a straight line is that it's not only just not a straight line in your discipline, say as a musician or an actor or something, but quite often people dot around from being performed through my career. So I was chatting to our manager one day. I was in another band, and I was talking to the manager saying, I'm just not getting the jobs. I'm not getting the gigs. What can I do? And he said, well, I've actually always thought you'd be probably quite good working in a record company. You know, you like talking to people. Maybe that was the acting coming out. I don't know. He said, you like talking to people. You've got a sort of way of expressing yourself. You've worked with bands and things. I know a record company who were looking for some new employees. Why don't you write to my friend Muff Winwood at CBS Records, and we'll see if we can get you a job there. So I did. I just wrote off, didn't think anything of it really. They were down in London, I was up in Sheffield, and I thought, hey, if I hear something, I hear something. And lo and behold, I got a letter from them saying, yeah, we want you to come and do an interview. And so I thought, well, maybe this is the next stage in my career, or maybe not. Let's go and see. When I went along to the interview, I realized this: transferable skills really, really matter. And actually, most of your skills are transferable. Somewhere, if you dig around, if you look at those pigeonholes in front of you with your different things that you're good at, if you piece those together, you can quite often find a combination that someone's looking for. And the transferable skills I'm talking about here are the fact that I'd been in bands and I was a musician. So I knew about being a musician, being on stage. I knew what that took. But I also spoke a couple of languages. I spoke French, I spoke a bit of Japanese, I spoke a little bit of German. And it just so happened, again, moment of luck, that CBS Records were looking for someone in their international department. I knew absolutely nothing about record companies, but they wanted someone who knew something about international languages and about working with musicians. So that was a good match. The arts is also sometimes about a thing called fake it till you make it, in that I had to kind of go in there and pretend I knew stuff that I didn't know for a little while I kind of worked out how a record was actually made. I didn't know a lot of that stuff about it's changed a lot now. You guys will never see the like of vinyl pressing plants and things that we used to deal with. And if you can imagine, my first job at CBS Records when I got it was sending cassette tapes by post to people in Japan and Australia and America, because there was no other way they could hear the music. There was no internet, so my job was sticking stamps on it and sending it to them so that they could have a listen to it. So what I ended up doing was being the international assistant at CBS Records. Well, what did that involve? It involved a lot of flying around on planes and taking performing artists to do things like TV shows, radio shows, and concerts around the world. All very exciting, but a young person's job, definitely, and not something I was going to do for the rest of my life. It was pretty exhausting stuff, but it was great fun. And I mixed with all sorts of people. This is a singer called Alison Moyet, who's still around. She's still singing. At that time, she was having massive hit records and was hugely popular. And I used to take Alison around the world and take her to do TV shows and things. This is us in Canada. This is when we went to Canada together to do some TV shows out there. And my job really was to look after those artists, to make sure that they got on the TV shows that we wanted them to get on, and that when they were on there, they were looked after. I used to book them into hotels. I used to organize their transport, take them around. And the reason the record company liked me doing that is because I knew what it was like to be a musician. I knew how much it mattered to them. And that's something you need to bear in mind too, is that if you're working with artists, they're producing stuff which comes from right within you. Any of you who've ever written a poem, written a song, done a performance really of any kind, know that it comes from somewhere pretty deep inside. And so when people talk to you about that and talk to you about your creativity, it's really important they do it sensitively, because this stuff matters to you. It's coming from right inside you. So that's something to bear in mind when you're talking to people about their creativity. There's nothing wrong with having a good reason to say, I like it, or I don't like it, or I don't think that was as good as it might be. But be sensitive about it, because this stuff comes from way deep down inside. And so, I had a lot of fun too. As you can imagine, working in a record company, that's me and the managing director of Sony Music Australia, complete madman. And that's with a band called Deacon Blue. When we took them down there on a concert tour, it's my free hat that I got while I was down there. And it was great life. It really was. And I was getting reasonably well paid, and it was all very exciting. But again, nothing lasts forever. So I'm just losing my point there. Here we go. So I spent a lot of time traveling around the world with these bands, and eventually, though, moved on to doing something slightly different and became the head of international for a label called Columbia Records in London. Same company, but I moved up through the ranks, meant I didn't have to travel around with the artists so much. So what was I doing then? What I was doing was planning it all, was trying to come up with a way of making those artists successful around the world. And that was what I was finding really exciting, was the idea that even if I couldn't be on stage, and believe me, there were days when I stood there and I looked at the drummer at the back of the band and I thought, yeah, but that could have been me. And sometimes I felt really jealous of that. But actually, there was such a thrill when we got a band to #1, or I took a band to Japan and they were on a TV show in front of millions of people. Wow, that was exciting too. I was helping people to be creative. And to be honest, that's what's got me out of bed in the mornings for the rest of my career, is the idea that I was helping other people to take their creativity and be successful with it. And what could be more fun than that, really? It's been great. So one thing I learned when I was working with all these artists was this: don't be an idiot, be nice. I worked with a lot of artists who were idiots, I have to confess. And the one thing I learned from them and watching them make mistakes on the way up is that be careful how you behave on the way up, because you might need people on the way down. Now, you can imagine, I was working with people who'd come from very humble backgrounds. I worked with a little boy band called Bros, who were 2 kids from Camberley in Surrey. And they were just 18 when they started, and they suddenly became global superstars. Everyone was throwing compliments at them, throwing money at them. They were having the time of their lives. And it's very easy when you're faced with that kind of adulation and that kind of everybody just offering you whatever you want, because suddenly you're their meal ticket. You're the way they're all earning money. They'll just give you anything. And it's very easy to act like a complete idiot. And I watched that happen. I watched people take ridiculous liberties with people and push people right to the limit. It actually happened to me once. I was traveling around Europe with an artist called Terence Trent D'Arby, who at the time was very, very, very successful, #1 records in the UK and things. And I took him to a TV show in Italy, and I'd taken him around, him and his band, around Europe, and they were acting like complete idiots all the time. Why? I guess they were bored. They were traveling around, going from one hotel room to another. They were just doing the same interviews, the same TV shows, week in, week out. And they were bored. So what did they do? They took it out on me. So they just changed their minds all the time about, they didn't want to eat this, they wanted to eat that. Can we have this? Can we have that? Pushing me all the time to just try and, I don't know, get me to burst, I suppose, to get me to lose my rag. So we went to do a TV show in Italy, and we went out for dinner with the Italian record company. And in this restaurant, I was with Terence and his band, so there were 12 of us, a very famous musician called Art Garfunkel, who was one half of a band called Simon and Garfunkel back in the 60s and 70s. So Art Garfunkel and his group were on another table, and Patsy Kensit, who was another artist I was looking after, on another table. We all sat down for dinner that night. I was really tired at this point, and the TV show was going to happen later that night. All of a sudden, the entire band on my table got up and walked out. And I just watched them walk out, and I was going, I don't believe this is happening. I can't believe they're doing this to me. Because the Italian record company was saying, what's wrong? What's wrong? You know, they couldn't understand what was. Art Garfunkel is a very nervous guy, was sat there going, what's happening? What's happening? So I felt a complete fool. And at this point, I followed them out of the restaurant, and I got this guy, this very famous singer. I pushed him up against a minibus, and I said, if you ever do that to me again, you will never. I completely lost it. Absolutely, completely lost my rag, which I kind of look back on now and said that was highly unprofessional. But it was just a real example of someone who hadn't thought through the fact that they needed me, actually. Because there was going to come a time in their future career, perhaps, when maybe I'd be a senior manager in a record company or something, and I'd be making a decision about their career. Didn't cross his mind that, you know, little me, who was taking them around Europe, might one day be someone they needed to look after. As it turns out, I got on with him better than almost any other artist I worked with in the future, because I did that. Because he suddenly respected me for giving him some boundaries. I think he was like a kid who'd been just given everything. He'd been spoiled. And he needed a parent or someone in authority to actually go thus far and no further. Don't do that to me. And he respected me more than the people who'd said, oh yeah, whatever you want, Terence, whatever you want. So actually that was a good experience for me, that sometimes you have to actually draw boundaries, even with people as famous as that. You have to say, no more of this, okay? And it does them some good too. So that was something I learned. And he actually did suffer from that business of being an idiot on the way up, because he only had one really successful album. And then he did a very different kind of difficult album as his second album. And everybody who'd been there to support him through that first album, who was asked to do the work on the second album, just went, no, I don't think so, actually, and walked away. And it was such a great example of not getting it right on your way up, because when you're on the way down, you just might need those people to support you. So whatever level of the arts you're at, just bear this in mind, that even if you're the one who everybody's going, wow, it's great to have you here, thank you for coming along, don't take it for granted. Don't act like an idiot just because people are praising you and lauding you to the heavens, because you might need those people. First of all, it's just rude, plain rude, and you shouldn't do it. But second of all, this is a very small world, the world of the arts. And that world will go round. That word would go round that you're not reliable, or that you're rude, or that you're... There's no reason why they would then help you when you need them to help you. So it's a good life lesson in general, but it's particularly true in the arts, I think, because lots of people do get spoiled and end up doing that thing. So what happened next? We got bought by Sony Music, funnily enough, my record company. So all of a sudden, transferable skills again. My Japanese came in kind of handy. That Japanese that I'd been studying at university, suddenly they wheel me out every time the Japanese came along, because the company was now owned by a Japanese company, which was great. But if I'm honest, I was getting fed up with that treadmill of just working in international promotions. And I kind of lost touch with the music. What I was doing was just shuffling money around or shuffling artists around. And what I wasn't really connected to anymore was that creative thing that I got into the music industry for. And that was really important to me. I really wanted to work with people who were doing it because they believed in it. That's where I came from. I came from that world of music. And I got the opportunity to work with independent record labels. And me and another guy at Sony Music had been watching the way that big record companies, these huge global corporations, used to take little independent record companies. And I don't know whether you know what the difference is really. An independent record company is one that isn't owned by a big corporation. It's just usually something that a couple of people have set up, that just they make a record very cheaply, or they make any kind of production, a film production or whatever, very, very cheaply. And they just keep it small and they do it themselves. They're usually very nimble. They change with the tide. And it's often got a very strong flavor, something very particular about it. And they're often hugely successful because they're very, very in tune with what's going on in the world at the moment. Sometimes those big corporations like the one I was working for just lose the plot, because all they're really being driven by is the money. It's just a profit motive. It's all about making the next dollar. And they lose that sense of, yeah, but it's all in the end about the creativity. So what me and this other guy wanted to do was take that very special thing about independent record labels and try and keep that going. What indie labels couldn't do was sell that music around the world. They didn't have offices around the world. They didn't have the money to promote that music around the world. So what we did was we decided to do it differently. What major record companies had tended to do was buy those independent record companies in, and they wondered why they stopped having hits. And the reason they stopped having hits, to be honest, was because they showered them with money. They took away their little offices and gave them big offices. They gave them lots of stuff. They made them kind of in their own image. And they couldn't understand why then they stopped laying the golden eggs. And the answer was because they'd taken away the very thing that made them special. So what we thought was, if we leave them small in the UK and keep them doing their thing in the UK, we can then just take the music and promote it around the world, but leave them to do their thing. And that's what we did for the next 7 years. And it was reasonably successful, actually. One thing, actually, okay. So yes, so this is this is the first band we ever signed, actually, when I started doing this. That's me, third from the left at the back, grinning for some reason at something behind the camera. And this is a band called Suede, who are still around, still in touch with them. They're touring in Southeast Asia at the moment, or were very recently, doing stadium and arena gigs out there. They've been fantastically successful over the years, and they were a very, very exciting band to be involved with in the early days. And what we wanted to do was keep them in connection with this guy here who ran their independent record company. So he was the guy really who knew how to make them make the best music. And we wanted to make sure that he was still right at the center of their creative world, while me and this guy, Jeremy, and Sylvia, and the other guys who had the power within the major record company could do the stuff that they couldn't do. And that was the trick we tried to pull with all sorts of them, but to do it in a very fair and equitable way, really. But we did have a very successful time. We sold about 30 million records in 7 years from that division. And yeah, we had the odd successful band. Don't even recognize this guy? It's Noel Gallagher from a band called Oasis. You might have heard about Oasis last year. They just put some tickets on sale, which caused a kind of global sensation because it was the biggest and most hot ticket in the UK. And yeah, this is me backstage with Noel at Earl's Court in London. So in 1993, I saw this little band Oasis at a bar in Manchester with 53 other people. And we'd been recommended to go and see them by this little record company and that we were working with. And they said, they're a sensational band. We want to sign them. And we stood there and we just went, we couldn't believe what we were seeing. This extraordinary young band that no one had heard of. And we ended up helping them get signed to the record company. This was the guy from the record company, one of them, Dick Green, one partner in the record company. And we did exactly what we said we were going to do. We left them with Creation Records, and we did the global work at making Oasis into a successful band. And that was a pretty successful ride. I sometimes tell people that I used to have hair before I worked with the Gallagher brothers, but I tore it all out working with them. They were tough to deal with, but it was an amazing thing to watch, seeing a band go from nothing all the way to #1 and to selling tens of millions of records around the world. And so really, the other thing we learned, though, is that I've missed a slide out somewhere here, definitely, I think. Have I? No, I'm just on the wrong page of my notes. What we learned was that it was quite tricky to actually keep that sort of commercial and creative thing in balance. Sometimes those things are very difficult to do, and that if you put too much money next to too much creativity, those two things can corrupt each other. They can coexist. But it was something that I learned, was that creativity and commerce can be quite tricky bedfellows. They're quite tricky things to get right. And so that was a lesson I learned when I was working at Sony, was that you've got to keep that balance right between having too much money around and having too much creativity spoiled by having too much in the way of money. It's a really difficult thing to explain, but it's something which would take more than these 40 minutes to explain to you. But I knew that what I was really enjoying was taking that creativity and making it into huge commercial success like Oasis. And so that was another light bulb moment for me, was that having gone in the early part of my music business career down a path that took me to just working with money and corporate things, suddenly I managed to find my way back to the music and to people who were genuinely creative and music I really believed in. The arts, if you're going to work in it, is a lucky place, because you can probably find in there something you feel lucky to get up and do every day. I feel incredibly privileged to get up every day and do what I do. And if you can find that thing that you feel genuinely passionate about and make that your life's work, go for it. It's something that's been incredibly valuable to me. I'm so glad, basically, that I'm not selling oil for the Japanese after all these years. So, but another thing happened that basically there I was riding high, everything was going well with these bands. I got made redundant. So the second time. So I was thinking, I can't believe this, just as everything was looking right again. I told you the arts is a bit of a roller coaster ride. I got made redundant. Along came the internet in the year 2000. Never been heard of before. It was this new thing called the internet. And suddenly what we couldn't do was take music, put it on a CD and sell it to the consumer anymore. Suddenly music was everywhere. Music was all over the internet. And we were losing our whole business model in the music industry. So all of a sudden they had to get rid of people. And I just happened to be in a good position to be got rid of. And that's what happened to me. So I thought to myself, I want to go off and do something different. I've learned a lot from doing this, but I want to actually go and run my own company. And bizarrely, what I decided to go off and do was run an art gallery. I'd really enjoyed buying art. I'd really enjoyed dealing with painters and sculptors and things to buy their work. And I thought one day I'd like to sell that. And I thought, this is the transferable skills thing again. I thought, I know a little bit about working with creative people and making their creativity successful. Maybe I can do that on a smaller scale with my own little art gallery. So that's what I went off and did. And I opened my own art gallery and I ran that, and I really, really enjoyed that, because there I was back connected with the artists, connected with it, and feeling like I was making a real difference to their careers. So that's what I did for the next 4 years. And then I came back to London. That was in France that I did that. And then I came back to London and ended up doing some art consultancy. So art consultancy is where you actually don't work for a company, you work for yourself. And what you're doing is helping other people to buy art or sell art. And so I just worked as an independent consultant, working on projects and buying art for companies and individuals. And one project I did was called Guitar Town London. And that brought together, and this is again about looking at your career and going, well, I know a bit about that and a bit about this, maybe I can put them together. This was a project that took music artists and put them together with visual artists. So what my job to do was to find these music artists and visual artists, and we put them together for a big charity event. You've probably seen these things where they paint elephants, and have you seen these, of fiberglass elephants and things? There's going to be a fiberglass elephant parade in Dorset this summer, actually. And what they do is they get artists to paint big replicas of things, whether they're elephants or guitars or whatever, and they're famous people, and they get them to sell them at auction. And then we raise money for charity. And this was a project raising money for 3 charities. And we got some of the biggest artists in the world, stars in the world, to sponsor these guitars and then get people to paint them. And it brought me into contact with this fella, for example. He's a fella called Robert Plant, who was the singer in a band called Led Zeppelin, one of the biggest rock bands in history. And this man, again, do you recognize him? Anybody recognize him? Paul McCartney from the Beatles, from a little band called the Beatles. And if you watch Paul McCartney on the television sometime, I know he's, 80 now, I think, but still playing. And he's still playing that guitar. That's actually a ukulele version of a guitar that we created as part of that project. But sometimes when you see him playing, sorry, this way around because he's left-handed, he plays a bass guitar with painted figures all over it. That came out of this project. He absolutely adores that guitar. And so that was something where I could, again, take 2 of my skills, working with visual arts and working with musical arts, put them together for the sake of a company called Gibson Guitars, who wanted to do this project. And that was an exciting thing to have done. What I didn't like, though, was working by myself. I didn't really enjoy that bit. I didn't enjoy sitting in my bedroom at home and running out of my own office. I wanted to work with a team of people. I love working with teams of people. And I was kind of missing that from my days at Sony. And so I had to think about that and had to look around for what was out there. And I ended up running an art school in London, a place called the Art Academy. Found a job there. They were needing someone to take over there. And what dawned on me was that I'd found the world of work that suited me, because the Art Academy was a charity. Now, it's not a charity like you might think of a charity that does things like saving orphan cats or saving starving people in Africa. This is a very different kind of charity. This is an arts charity. And if you're going to go and work in the arts, it's worth finding out what arts charities are all about. They're companies that work not for profit. Now, that doesn't mean they're not trying to make any money. All it means is that if they do make money, it all gets plowed back into what they're trying to do. They have a stated aim, and then they put all of their resources back into doing that. So it's not about giving money to shareholders. It's not about making a big profit and then selling a company off at the end of the day. It's about making their vision come true. And I loved that. That was something I really, really enjoyed doing. And so for 4 years, I ran the Art Academy in London, and we built it up and we built it up. It was a place where people could go to learn to paint and sculpt. And And we grew it from being a very, very small enterprise into really quite a big enterprise. And they've just moved into premises next to Tate Modern in London, and they now run a BA course and things. And so it's been great to watch that little idea grow. And it was something I realized I was quite adept at doing, because again, I'd taken the different skills from my life. So it was working in the arts, but also the fact that I'd worked in a big company. So I knew about how companies worked and how you could grow a corporate entity. And so I took that and put it together and started working with that charity, and we grew it. But then 13 years ago, I decided to move to Dorset, and I found another very small charity that was trying to grow. And that's where I am now. And that's Dorchester Arts, which is where I am. The same idea, a small charity that had been formed within the community that had a really strong idea of what it wanted to do. It wanted to bring great performances to Dorchester. It wanted to give people chances to be creative themselves. And it wanted to nurture the talent that we find ourselves very richly endowed with in Dorset. And so my job over the last 12, 13 years has been to take that little idea and grow it, but grow it without losing its spirit, grow it without losing its sort of reason for being there. And that's what I hope we've done. I hope what we've managed to do is turn something that was a £200,000 business into a £500,000 business now, but to still feel like we're sticking to our original identity and to our original aims and objectives. So what do I do as an artistic director? What does that job mean? Well, basically, I'm the boss. What it means is that I give the strategic direction for the organization. So that means that I set the idea of where we're going to be in 3 or 5 years' time, try and give people a roadmap that they can work to. I try and keep the team together and make sure that the team, I've got a team of 6 people, make sure they've got their resources and that they know what they're doing, and helping to steer our youth theatre, get young people involved in the arts, help create big events like festival events that we do every few years, and at the same time, try and get our funding on track. So we get some funding from Dorset Council and from Dorchester Town Council. I need to make sure that we have good relationships with those people. And then the other thing I do is do the programme. So we programme about 120 shows a year, and it's my job to make up that programme out of music, theatre, dance, visual arts, all the different things we do. So at the end of the day, what's happened is that I've managed to, very luckily, and this was my stroke of luck again, find a job where I could put together almost everything I've done across, wow, it's now nearly 50 years I've been doing this, that I've been putting together. And I found a job where they all sort of come into one. And that makes me a very happy man, and I feel a very lucky man to have worked in the arts all my life. And if some of you or all of you end up working in the arts, then I think you'll be very lucky people too. It's not always an easy road, it's not always a straight road, but it's always an exciting road, and I find an incredibly rewarding one. So good luck if you do it, you'll need it. But remember, keep on practicing, keep honing those skills. Don't forget you've got lots of little skills that you'll build up over your life. Sometimes you need to put those together, not just look down one line. And maybe you too can have an exciting career and end up, as happy with their lives as I am. So thanks for listening, and I hope you've got some questions now. A very important thing to learn as well is there's no such thing as a stupid question. Don't be shy about asking things. If you're worried about that, there's no such thing. It's absolutely fine. And I hope that's been of some value.
Lovely. Thank you, Mark. I'm sure you'll agree, everyone, that was an absolutely fantastic talk today, and really inspiring you all in terms of career opportunities in the arts. What we'd like to do now is to open this up, if you're open.
Yeah, absolutely,
questions from the audience. So could we have a few questions from Harry?
Yeah, Harry. Absolutely. Now, when I started out, video games didn't even exist. I worked with a guy called Martin Heath in a little record company back in the 1980s. And Martin used to say to me, video games are the future. And I would say, don't be ridiculous. Music's the future, Martin. How wrong I was. Video games, of course, since then have absolutely exploded. And the great thing with the world of video games is You can work in the world of video games if you're an artist, if you're a musician, if you're an animator, if so many things come together in the world of video games. I mean, who would predict that there would have been a show on BBC Radio these days that's all about just the music from video games? I mean, it's become something massive in its own right. So absolutely, video games is right up there. I didn't end up getting involved in it because they hadn't invented video games when I was a kid. But yeah, absolutely. It's now right up there, and probably, I think, more valuable now than the music industry globally. So yeah, something you're interested in? Yeah, go for it. It's a great world to be involved in. So,
other questions, please? Yes, Cameron.
What were your parents like when you first said to them you want to be in the world of arts?
they were actually great. I was lucky in that my mum, I think, had always probably wanted to be involved in the world of the arts. My dad, I think, was a bit more skeptical. He was from a more conventional family. He was a GP, he was a doctor. And I think it was only because they were worried sometimes, I think, that it's an unstable kind of world, or that they think it's an unstable kind of world, that they thought, well, maybe it'd be safer if he had a more predictable career, if he went off and did something in law or medicine or something more tangible. But when I sort of had to prove it to them, I think, and say to them, no, I'm genuine about this. I'm really willing to give this a go. And to say, well, think about it this way. I've got some things behind me already. I've got a good education behind me. If this doesn't work out, I've still already got that. Actually, what happened was I didn't end up making it as a performer. But what I managed to prove to them was that that wasn't a failure. Actually, the fact that I never made my life's work playing the drums was actually a failure. All it was a different way of finding my career path, really, through the arts. It was never wasted. But when I used to run the art school, we spent a lot of time actually trying to give the people we interviewed, who were often people only a few years older than yourselves, the ammunition to go back to their parents and persuade them that coming to art school was the right thing to do. Because I know it's tough sometimes. I know it's not easy. Sometimes if you go and do things like volunteering at local arts organizations and go and get to know the people that actually do have careers in the arts, it's really useful for you, because you can introduce them to your parents, maybe get your parents to come and see that actually there is a world out there in which people do make a good living, and actually a reasonably stable living in the arts. So sometimes just equip yourselves with that ammunition and try and find people who can help you make the case to your parents. I know it's tough sometimes. So,
other questions, please? Other questions on the floor?
no?
Okay. Well, I think that's so interesting. How many of you are thinking, this is really interesting, about engaging with the arts? Obviously, a lot of you are studying, you're all studying performing arts in here, and also perhaps those online as well that are really interested in performing arts and studying performing arts. It's a great career, but like Mark said, it takes time, and it's making those acquaintances that you need in the arts that really makes all the difference, I think, as well, and exposing everybody to the arts, going to the theatre, looking at what the theatre has to offer for you in this room and online as well. And I do think that is absolutely the key. And how many of you are thinking here about perhaps going on and pursuing the arts? Great. Ava, do you just want to say a little bit about what you'd like to do in the future? Is there any but you love acting, don't you? And you love dancing. I know that for a fact. And Ava's been in a lot of our shows as well here, and I know that she really loves being on the stage. And there are so many career opportunities for you out there with regards to the arts. So can we please give a great thank you to Mark Tattersall for coming in today. Thank you to Mark, and thank you to joining us online. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks, Mark. Thanks for the opportunity. Thank you.